On Mother's Day, my son wrapped a giant red bow around a 5-bedroom in a leafy cul-de-sac and handed his in-laws the keys, then handed me a gift bag that rattled with a broken vase. The May sun flashed off the just sold sign, while a realtor in heels popped champagne and a drone buzzed overhead, filming their tears. Kayla squeezed Ethan's arm. Her parents, the Parkers, sobbed into matching sweaters as neighbors cheered and iPhones rose like a chorus. Balloons scraped the sky, confetti stuck to my lipstick, and the grass smelled like fresh cut and money. I stared into the bag at cracked porcelain and felt my cheeks burn hotter than the asphalt. The tissue paper rasped, the rim nicked my finger, and a chalky dust, old attic dust, floated up, sweet with a whisper of lavender. "Isn't it perfect for you, Mom?" "Vintage." Ethan grinned, arms slung around the people moving into the life I once prayed I could give him. The Parkers clutched a brass key, their mouths open, rapt. A realtor named Cheryl angled them toward the bow for the perfect shot. Somewhere a sprinkler hissed, and the cork rolled to my shoe like a period at the end of a sentence I didn't write. I smiled so hard my jaw trembled, listening to the word family echo without a place to land. I recognized the vase, the hairline seam, the missing rose petal. My mother's old piece from my own attic, the one the dog knocked over last winter and I'd saved to fix. Glue clung in cloudy veins. Money, it seemed, had cleared everywhere else. "Mom, can you take our picture?" Kayla chirped, thrusting her phone toward me as if the sidewalk were my stage and invisibility my costume. The bow flapped in the breeze, Zillow estimates danced in my head, and somewhere across town my apartment windows rattled with the train I catch to work. I swallowed the bitter metal taste of being an afterthought and steadied my hands. If you're wondering how my son went from sleeping on my chest to buying a mansion for his in-laws and handing me a broken heirloom, I'm about to tell you. I'll show you the small cuts that led to this wound, the favors, the silence, the little trades we call love. Stay with me as I rewind from this curb to the kitchen tables and church pews where the real decisions were made. And if you've ever felt invisible on a day meant to honor you, hit subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. Because mothers like me have stories, and today, mine finally gets the mic. My name is Margaret, though most people call me Maggie, and I turned 66 in March when the crocuses were just brave enough to poke through the crusted snow along my sidewalk. My son, Ethan, was born in May, a spring baby who made the lilacs outside our old porch seem to bloom twice as big, and I used to tell him we were made of the same season. Me all windbreaker and casseroles, him all sneakers and bright eyes. Today, on a cul-de-sac in Short Hills, where the trees are older than my apartment building and the azaleas line the edges of lawns like pink frosting, I watched him give the Parkers a house with a bow big enough to seatbelt. He lifted the key in a way that made the drone hum tighter, and the realtor, Cheryl, with a spray tan the exact color of a good baguette, clapped like a metronome. When the Charleston green door swung open and everyone gasped at the staircase with its glossy banister, Kayla slid her hand into his and said, "This is going to be perfect for hosting, babe." Like they'd been waiting their whole lives to finally be the center of a family portrait in the right light. I've always been a woman who notices small things. The way the May sun makes dust on a dashboard look like powdered sugar. The nick on a rim that is not any nick, but the one your mother made when she lifted her vase from the same cardboard box each Memorial Day to tuck peonies in like old secrets. When I reached into the gift bag Ethan handed me with a grin that used to be mine. The grin he'd flash up at me when he was 9, and we waited for the M15 at the bus stop outside St. Michael's after choir practice. I felt the little lip catch of my own attic, the chalky bloom of that lavender sachet my mother tucked into everything she wanted to smell like hope. And the vase in my hands wasn't some random find. It was hers. The one whose hairline crack I'd promised to mend once my hands were steadier, once the winter ended, once I had a minute that didn't also belong to someone else. "Isn't it perfect, Mom?" Vintage. Ethan lifted his phone to show me the listing photos of the Parkers' new kitchen, as if the subject was the beauty in his screen and not the seam across the porcelain in my hands. Donna Parker held her own phone at arm's length and, for a second, Her gaze swept over me like the way you'd glance at a landscape you passed 1,000 times and never named. Donna's sweaters always match Richard's in a way I can't decide is choreographed or just the shape of their marriage. They are the kind of couple who iron napkins and know the difference between chargers for plates and chargers for phones, and they have a way of arranging people in rooms so that there is always a head of the table and the head is always one of theirs. Donna called Cheryl darling, and then pinched Kayla's cheek like she was still 12 and not a woman with a wedding band that glinted like a tiny sun. She has the kind of smile that makes you feel like you've been scooped and measured, then tapped level with her finger. I smiled so hard my jaw trembled, because there are smiles you do because it is Mother's Day, and there are signs in people's yards, and there is confetti in your hair, and your child is looking at you, asking for one. My train windows back in Elizabeth rattle in their frames when the Northeast Corridor pumps by. And I have trained myself to sleep through it, the way you train yourself to breathe through something that doesn't improve if you complain. I stood there, the broken rim nicking my finger, that soft old lavender rising up gentle as a hymn. And I thought about all the places a word like family had landed in my life, and all the places it never even got a cushion. If the story is going to be told clean, as close to bone as I can make it, I should tell you that I wasn't always quiet. When Ethan was little, I was loud with him in ways that were all joy and survival. "We got this, kiddo," I used to say, bending over math homework at our wobbly kitchen table, drawing boxes around fractions to make them feel less slippery. "One more street," I'd whisper, when he and I walked the 2 extra blocks to the cheaper bodega, because Mrs. Delgado would slide me day-old bread with a wink if I asked. The first time I rode the train with him, he was wrapped like a burrito in a blue blanket my sister crocheted, and he slept through Newark like a prince. My hands have always smelled like lemon oil, and lined a million book covers with brown paper bags, smoothed sheets on beds I made for other people's relatives, counted tips in a quiet apartment where the neighbors' voices floated up like laundry scents. I was 21 and afraid when his father left. There are 1,000 simple ways to tell that story, and none of them matter to what I did next, which was work. St. Mary's needed someone to scrub trays and fold napkins, and Mrs. Mendez at the ShopRite bakery let me in early on Saturdays to fill cases with cannoli and cowlick a little icing off my knuckles when no one looked. At night, I took in hemming for the girls on our block who saved for prom but needed someone to make that dress line up right with their dreams. I learned the names of all the buses by heart, the schedules that could get you from a double shift to a parent-teacher conference with 15 minutes to spare if you ran the last block. When he needed braces, I sold the ring I had said vows with and told him I had found a coupon. When the old Honda finally gave up on the turnpike shoulder one July, gearbox smoking like an old man, I walked in heat that made the asphalt wobble, and I paid the tow with my fingers shaking while I calculated how long I could live on peanut butter. We made Halloween costumes with duct tape and laugh lines, and I made lasagna that lasted 4 days and made him believe leftovers were a choice, not a necessity. I would take him to church on Sundays because my mother did, and because there is a particular kindness in sitting shoulder to shoulder with strangers and being told you are loved in a voice that doesn't mind if you have anything to bring to the potluck afterward. We always brought something. I learned how to make rice that didn't clump, and Mrs. Alvarez showed me how to fold tamales, and once, when there wasn't any meat left in the freezer, we brought oranges from the sale bin, and I arranged them in my mother's vase like coins on a good day. That vase came to me wrapped in a towel the summer my mother got sick, when the lilies in her yard leaned toward the back fence, and she said from the screen door, "It's been in the family longer than I've had my laugh." It had roses at the shoulder, one petal chipped, and a seam you could only see when the light was right. When I lifted it, it always smelled faintly of the sachets she tucked in drawers and the starch on my father's shirts. If we had peonies for Memorial Day or mums in November, the vase sat like a little altar on our table, reminding us we were not poor so much as we were resourceful and sentimental. Ethan grew up with the kind of light in his eyes that made teachers pull me aside and say, "He's special." He liked to take things apart and put them back together, the remote, the toaster, my patience. At 9, he set his heart on the science fair, and we made a volcano out of papier-mâché that stained my fingernails red for a week. He wore the white shirt I ironed with a low heat because the thermostat in the hallway clicks on late if the building is old and cheap, and he stood in front of a trifold like a man in a courtroom and convinced the whole gymnasium that vinegar and baking soda could make a person believe in magic again. The school sent him to a summer camp with computers and kids who had never been told no by a bus schedule, and he came home electric with a new language I didn't know but wanted to learn. The day he got his acceptance to Rutgers, we stood at the kitchen sink and cried into 2 mugs of coffee. He got some scholarship, and I got a second job at the diner on Morris Avenue where the owner called me doll, in a way that made my skin feel thin, but my wallet not so empty. I made pies from scratch in the off hours, and the cook taught me how to crack eggs with one hand like the waitresses in movies do, like a magic trick I finally learned. We wore fake leather shoes to his graduation so our feet could breathe and I could pretend our life had always been this steady. When he met Kayla his junior year, he brought her over for a spaghetti dinner. I budgeted like a party. She walked in with a bottle of wine that cost more than a week of groceries and flowers wrapped in brown paper, and she said, "Oh, I love old things," when she saw the picture of my mother in its chipped frame. Kayla had a laugh like glass chimes and hair that fell just so, even on humid days. She came from a world with weekends in Lake George and ski trips that taught you the alphabet of slopes as a kid. When I went to their apartment after graduation, it had a sectional that matched and a plant that looked capital-lettered, something a decorator might have picked. She said her mother, Donna, was excited to meet me, and I bought a blouse from Marshall's and a tube of lipstick that made my mouth feel a little less tired. The Parkers' house in Summit looked like its own reason to put on slippers. The paneled den smelled like leather and brandy, and there was a painting above the mantel of a boat on water that was all metaphor. Donna opened the door herself with a small dog peeking around her ankles, and she said, "Margaret," like she was testing out my name to see if it would fit in her mouth without leaving a ring. She didn't call me Maggie. I'm not sure if she thought the nickname was unseemly or if she didn't like that anyone else had a say. She wore a scarf tied just right, and her kitchen had a pot filler over the stove that made me think of palaces. She set down a cheese board with the kind of cheeses that require a story and said, "We don't really eat much red sauce here, so much acid," which made me want to open the Tupperware of meatballs I'd brought anyway, but I didn't. She said Kayla had always wanted a summer wedding and asked if I'd seen the ballroom at the Grand Hotel, and when I told her a backyard wedding with twinkle lights sounded lovely, she smiled and patted my hand like she might a pet who had brought the wrong stick. Richard Parker is quiet in a way that fills room corners. He listens, leans back, and says things like, "We'll take care of that," about things I didn't know I wasn't capable of taking care of. When Ethan got a job in Hoboken at a startup and needed to move closer, they helped with the security deposit for an apartment that had a doorman, something I didn't know you could require. That was the first little cut I made look like a necklace. I offered to help with furniture, and they told me not to worry. They had it handled. They said I didn't need to stress about the rehearsal dinner because they wanted to host it themselves, to keep it simple. And then they kept it so simple I was seated at the end of a long table by the speakers where I couldn't hear my name in the toasts. Donna's speech was a neat, folded thing about lineage and love and how watching your child choose well is the greatest gift. And she turned to me only to say how sweet Ethan's childhood must have been. So small town, as if small were the same as lacking, as if small were a polite way to say less than. I bought a dress for the wedding that was the color of dawn, and I let the salon lady talk me into an updo I didn't recognize myself in. Donna sent a picture a week before of the Parker women's dresses and said it would be lovely if the mother of the groom could be in a more neutral palette so the photos would remain cohesive. I returned my dawn and bought something beige that made me feel like a wall. I offered my mother's vase to hold the bouquet at the reception, thinking of how flowers had always made my kitchen feel holy. Donna said, "It's darling, really, but the florist will provide matching vessels." And her eyes flicked over the chip on the petal like a judge tapping a gavel. At the church, when it was time for the mother-son dance, they played a song that meant nothing to us because it had a better beat for a group number, and halfway through the groomsmen joined, and it was a swirl of laughter and spectacle. And then, the moment was gone. In the photos, I am smiling so hard my mouth has corners that look foreign. After the wedding came the calls that started with, "Just a favor." Could I pick up a package? Could I swing by the dog groomer because their schedules were bananas? It didn't feel like trouble, because I have always been a person who knows the color of the right stripe in the crosswalk, and which deli will give you an extra pickle if you ask nice. I babysat their puppy the first time they went upstate, and I fell in love with how easily a small creature will lean its whole weight into you if you hold still. When their dishwasher broke in their condo in Jersey City, they stayed with the Parkers in Summit, and I drove over with lasagna because not having dishes feels harder than it is, and food can make a person feel less undone. Donna met me at the door and said she didn't want to mess up the surfaces with tomato, but she took the foil pan anyway and brought me a napkin like she was worried my casserole might drip onto her rug. Then came the house talk. "We're going to look at places," Kayla said one Sunday when we met for bagels in Milburn. She corrected me when I said "with" by saying "for," and I didn't understand until she said, "My parents need a place with an extra room for my dad's office. It's too much for them to maintain the Summit house, and you know how hard the commute is." Though what I knew was how to thread my way through the NJ transit schedule, not how to parse the difficulty of an 8-minute train ride. Ethan looked at her like she hung the moon, and I looked down at the sesame seeds fallen on my plate like confetti after a party you weren't actually invited to. I had made a plan to fix my mother's vase in February, when the dog knocked it off the cabinet during a nor'easter, and I heard the sound it made on the wood floor like a small bell giving up. I kept the pieces on the counter, each edge memorizing where it used to belong, and I bought the good glue from the hardware store with a man named Tony on a stool at the register who told me to take my time. I pressed the edges together and held them until my arms ached, and then I set it aside like a bone healing. Life filled in the edges. Extra shifts because Jolene's father got sick and she needed to fly to Florida, and a neighbor's kid who needed algebra help, and again, the phone that told me someone needed something I could provide. Somewhere in there, I told myself I would get to it as soon as the weather turned, as soon as I had caught up, as soon as. In my mind, the vase sat already mended, glowing quiet in my kitchen window with tulips in April. But the vase showed up in a gift bag on a lawn that smelled like fresh cut and money, called vintage, with a beaming grin, as if the effort had been made by someone else, as if age were a flavor more than a fact. And I, Margaret with a smile, the mother who taught Ethan to tie his shoes by singing "Bunny Ears," stood holding a cracked heirloom and nearly thanked him. If I had opened my mouth, the thank you would have been the size of my whole life. Donna's arm was threaded through Richard's as they posed on the steps, and she asked if I would be kind enough to get a few photos from the sidewalk so she could have the house framing her just so. "Our girls are coming from Pilates," she said, meaning Kayla's bridesmaids, all of them with teeth so white they reflected sky. Cheryl chirped that the drone footage was going to be insane content, and the ball of ribbon on the driveway twitched in the breeze like a heart. When I handed Kayla back her phone after taking pictures of Ethan sliding a key into a lock that wasn't his, she squeezed my elbow in a way that made my skin go cold. "We're so glad you could be here," she said brightly, words that in another context mean love and, here, felt like the courtesy of a hostess making small talk. "If you had run into me at ShopRite later, by the green beans, you wouldn't have known anything had happened. I put a sack of flour into my cart because it was on sale 2 for 1, and I know sales the way other people know wine. I took the bus back with my tote bag against my hip where a baby used to live, and I climbed the stairs to my apartment, the kind with handrails that wobble even more in summer. The train rattled past, and I set my keys in the old dish by the door, and I put the vase on the table and turned the fan on low. I made a cup of tea, chamomile with honey, the single indulgence I allow myself to be brand name, and I sat and pressed my finger to the seam in the porcelain like a rosary. Outside the window, Mr. Alvarez watered his tomatoes in plastic buckets with holes drilled in the bottom. A child on the floor above dragged a chair. Somewhere, a mother bought a cake that said "Best Mom" in frosting, and somewhere else, a woman put a chicken in the oven pretending not to count who would be at the table. I thought about the kitchen tables and church pews where, Like I had almost promised on that curb, the decisions were made, not by gavel or vote, but by habit. When Ethan was 11, he came home with a field trip form for Washington, D.C., and the price made my throat itch. "We'll make it work," I said immediately, because one of my less wise gifts is promising before I know if the world will agree. I took 2 extra shifts at the diner and wore the kind of shoes that promise you the arch support you can't afford. I packed him a bag with snacks and a disposable camera and kissed his forehead before dawn like the day itself had asked for my blessing. When he stood in front of the Lincoln Memorial in the photo he later showed me, grinning with a friend's arm slung around his shoulder, he looked already like someone who belonged. That is a mother's job, I think now, to take the edges off rooms so when your child walks into them, they feel less the rub of lives they never lived. The rub has always been that you do it so well, they forget you did it at all. Donna called me once last year when the sitter canceled and she wondered if I could pop over to sit with her grandson from her sister while she ran to have a window treatment measured. It was a Tuesday, and she said the measuring guy could only come then. You know how contractors are. And her tone said she had never waited for anyone to show up 5 hours late, and if she had, she would have made him a sandwich anyway. I went because I have always gone, and their house smelled like lemon and lilies and a dog that had been brushed within an inch of its life. I sat on the sofa with the toddler while Daniel Tiger sang about feelings, and I thought about how the last time I had a child on my lap on a Tuesday, he'd been sticky with popsicles and the box fan rattled like it might fling itself out of the window just to be free. When Donna came back, she pressed a folded bill in my hand like I was a girl in a lemonade stand and said, "Go get yourself a pedicure." And something in me cracked that had nothing to do with porcelain. The morning Ethan told me he and Kayla were trying for a baby, he had come over with a bag of bagels and a container of scallion cream cheese, my favorite, because somewhere in him still lives the boy who memorized me. He sat at my table, spreading cream cheese thick enough to break a knife, and he told me with that same bright-eyed urgency he had at 9. I wanted to stand on my chair and sing, to drive to the dollar store and buy streamers, to dig out the little sweater I knit him in a February so cold our breath felt like smoke, and mail it to the future. But there was a tremor in his voice when he told me they'd joined a group, a mommies-to-be thing, and they had names picked out, and Donna had already called dibs on Mimi because Grandma made her feel old. "What would you like them to call you?" he asked, which should have felt like he was handing me a crown, but I felt like he was offering me a napkin after he'd spilled on my favorite chair. I said Grandma because I come from plain talk, and then Kayla, who had been quiet until then, said, "We'll have to see what they settle on," as if the baby would pop out saying, "Mimi," as if families are not built with little choices like bricks. Kayla's mother's dominance has never been obvious enough to tell a story about at a bar. It's 1,000 small nothings. She said at the bridal shower, "Margaret, do you mind taking the bows off the gifts and arranging them by color? You have such an eye." When I brought a handmade quilt, she ran her finger over the stitches and said, "You did this by hand?" I would have just ordered one. They're so affordable now, as if my work was obsolete. At Thanksgiving this past year, she put me at the end of the table near the sideboard, and as she passed the cranberry sauce, she said, "We've been thinking about hosting Christmas, Maggie. It just seems easier," as if easier were a standard I had any say in. When I offered to bring my mother sweet potatoes, she smiled and said, "Oh gosh, we're doing a lighter menu." And in the photos, I can't tell if my cheeks are flushed from the oven or from being invisible. As the days lengthened toward this Mother's Day, and news about the house warmed over in texts with photos of crown molding and a yard made for cornhole, I learned the price per square foot of a life I will never set rules in. There were emails about paint colors, a group chat where I learned Kayla likes greige, and an Amazon list of things a house needs that sounded like a foreign language. Lawn aerator, salt lamp, shiplap peel and stick backsplash, a bench for the mudroom. I wrote back once saying I had a solid bench in my storage unit if they wanted something with history. Donna replied with a link to a brand new bench that arrived in 2 days. The day a landscaping truck idled outside my apartment and a man unloaded flats of begonias for the building next door, I thought about the lawn I mowed in flip-flops when Ethan was little, the way I cut the grass in diagonal stripes because it made him laugh to see the pattern change. I should tell you there were good moments, because there were. The night Kayla got a promotion and we ate at a little place in Montclair with fairy lights and a burrata that tasted like a cloud, Ethan scooped up a forkful and fed it to me like a kid. The afternoon they brought me a vanilla birthday cake with 66 in blue candles and sang so loud Mrs. Castillo down the hall joined in off-key, I cried, and it had nothing to do with sorrow. Even at the house today, when Ethan lifted the key and looked up at me from the steps, something in his face flickered like it did when he nailed his spelling test words at 8, when I tape-laminated them to the fridge, and we ate pancakes for dinner in celebration. Love is not simple, even when life is. I washed the vase at my sink that night, the building trembling with the train in a way my bones know now like a lullaby. The glue had bubbled along the seam where someone less careful than I would have been had tried to fix it, some fingers that didn't know the feel of my mother's things. I dabbed at the residue with a rag and placed the vase on a towel to dry. I opened the window and let the spring air in, and it smelled like rain on concrete and fried onions from the corner. I looked at the photo albums stacked on the bookshelf, Ethan in a striped shirt with teeth too big for his face, Ethan holding a goldfish bowl like a trophy, Ethan and me on the boardwalk in Point Pleasant with hair whipped into nests by the shore. I pulled one down and turned to a page where he stood in front of the school science fair, his shoelaces double-knotted like I taught him, his eyes confident. I pressed my finger on his shoulders in that picture, a small blessing from a woman alone at a table. The phone buzzed, a message from Kayla. "So glad you were there today. We have extra cake if you want to swing by tomorrow. Also, Mom thought the bow might look great for our housewarming. She's going to save it. And don't forget, next Sunday is the contractor walkthrough 10 a.m. Would you be able to take notes?" My finger hovered. I thought about being the person with the notebook in a house that wasn't mine, writing down the names of knobs and hinges. I thought about the way Donna had once looked at me and said, kindly and cleanly, "You must be so proud of the man Ethan has become," in a tone that meant she also knew precisely who she thought had polished him. I rinsed my teacup and turned the vase so the hairline seam faced me. My mother had a way of saying things without making them feel heavy. "Be the one who shows up," she'd say when we were late to bring casserole to someone's grief. "But don't mistake showing up for disappearing." I have perhaps been doing exactly that. Arriving so completely, I evaporate. You train people how to treat you by how you treat yourself, and I have let myself be the person who always smiles and says yes, even when the yes stacked up in me like boxes I never got around to unpacking. There is a bigger wave coming, something beyond a house with a bow. Maybe it is a baby and all the naming that comes with one, the names they'll pick for themselves, Mimi and Pop and whatever they decide I can be. Maybe it is a holiday at a table where my role will be to carry the rolls while Donna carves a roast I paid for in 1,000 forgotten hours. Maybe it is something smaller that will rise up out of a pile of smaller somethings until it is suddenly visible. The thing I know is that I will not be able to keep nodding like a dashboard bobblehead when someone else tells my story for me. The week builds to a Friday, the way a breath fills your lungs. I go to work at the hospital cafeteria, hair netted, hands sure, and I serve Salisbury steak in Jell-O cups and pour coffee for nurses who save people every day without telling the world about it on Facebook. They tell me the stories of their kids and their dog and their mothers, and I see in their eyes the same sheen I felt in my own 1,000 times, the gloss of love and exhaustion. On Wednesday, Mrs. Patel asks if I'm going to the chapel that afternoon. The hospital keeps a quiet space full of light that feels like a different country. I go in, sit on a wooden bench that smells like lemon oil, and close my eyes. I think about my mother's hands, the way they were always busy, peeling, folding, stitching, and I think about the lavender sachet she tucked in drawers that somehow left its scent in a vase, and now in the room of a house I will take notes in if I let myself be asked like that. On Thursday, Ethan texts to ask if I can come to the house on Sunday to help with logistics. I can feel the ask he isn't saying. He will want me to be the person who notices which light switch belongs to which light, who records the model numbers of appliances, who knows what day the trash goes out. He will want me to be the person I have always been. I type back, "Let me think about it," and it is the first time in a long time I have not said yes right away. He responds with a thumbs up, which is a modern blessing, I guess. That night, I pull out a pen and card from the tin I keep in the cupboard, the one with the picture of the Statue of Liberty on it. I write an old-fashioned letter, because some things need to be spelled in ink to be real. I tell Ethan stories I've told him before, and some I haven't. I remind him that when he was 6 and had the flu, I slept on the floor next to his bed because he wanted to hear me breathe. I remind him that when he was 13 and his voice cracked and he cried in frustration because it sounded like he was being squeezed, I told him that change always sounds funny before it feels right. I tell him I liked his goofy hair at 14 because it made him look like he listened to bands that didn't exist, and I tell him I would go back to cleaning the restaurant at midnight just to take his boots off in winter again and warm them by the heater vent so he'd feel cared for in his sleep. I tell him I am proud of the man he is, and also that pride is not a seat you get by default. It is a seat you earn by remembering who brought you to the table. I tell him I will not be a note-taker in a house I have never been invited to even pick the paint for, and I tell him I loved him before any of the Parkers ever knew what color his eyes were. I fold the card and seal it and slip it in my purse. I don't know if I will give it to him, but I have written it, and there is a kind of healing in that. On Friday, I take the vase down to the hardware store and I ask Tony for a different glue. He gives me a new tube and says, "This is the kind that sets slow. You have to hold it, but once it's set, it's set." And I think about how many things we let set too fast. I bring the vase home and I sit at my table and I press the seam together, my fingers steady, and I count. I count the graduation caps I watched rise like birds. I count the holidays I carved a turkey alone. I count the times someone said, "Don't worry about it, we got it," and it turned out what they had was my absence. I count to 60 and then another 60, and I sit very still. My hands shake a little, but I keep steadying them. When I open my fingers, the glue line is a clean, bright seam, not invisible, but smooth, like a scar you earned. The next morning, I go to the farmer's market by the train stop, and I buy peonies, 3-fisted bunches of them, blousy and extravagant, the exact ones my mother loved. The man at the stall says, "Big plans?" And I say, "Yes," and he doesn't ask what kind. I carry them back, the blossoms brushing my forearm, and I cut the stems at a slant under running water, the way my mother taught me. I arrange them in the vase, and they open like someone is telling them a secret that makes them laugh. I set the vase on my table, my apartment smelling like a room in a richer house, and for the first time in a long time, I feel like I have moved into my life again. On Sunday morning, I put on a denim shirt and clean sneakers, and I tuck the letter in my purse. I take the train. I like the rhythm of it, the stops announced with a voice that has become a friend. I get off in Millburn, and I walk the rest of the way because the day is clear and the sidewalks are shaded, and I need the time between the station and the house that isn't mine to decide how I am going to tell the truth, in a way that will keep all of us whole. When I walk up the Parkers' new driveway, Donna is in a linen dress and her hair is in a neat bob that catches the light. "There she is," she says, like an unveiling, and hands me a yellow legal pad. "You're so good at this," she murmurs, and something in me goes still and sharp. I look at the pad, at the house, at Ethan's face, hopeful and trying so hard, and I take a breath that feels like the first one after you stop crying. "Donna," I say, my voice calm in a way that is new to me. "I'm here because I love my son. I'm not here to take notes." Her smile tightens just a notch, but the sky doesn't fall and the ground doesn't open. Ethan's eyes flick to mine, and I see the boy who used to look to me for permission to climb higher on the playground ladder. I see the man who stands in front of a house he didn't buy for me, and I see his heart trying to be big enough to hold us all. Kayla's mouth opens and then closes, and for one suspended moment, the life we have all been building out of politeness and carefulness and 1,000 small silences shakes like the train that runs by my window. I brought you a housewarming gift, I say, and I hand Kayla a small wrapped box. Inside is a key, old-fashioned, heavy and iron, from a flea market where I once walked with Ethan when he was 8 and he pretended to be a shopkeep. It's a reminder, I say, that houses are made of wood and stone and mortgages, but homes are made of who we are to each other. I'm going to be part of this family in a way that looks like love and also respect. My voice doesn't tremble, and I have never been more proud of its steadiness. Donna blinks, and she nods slowly, as if she can feel the shape of this new thing, and is deciding whether it can live in this house. Of course, she says, polite, controlled. Of course. Ethan moves toward me, the way he used to, and he takes the letter from my hand, even though I haven't given it to him yet. He tucks it into his pocket like he knows it matters, and that the words in it are the ones he needs to hold. The contractor clears his throat and asks about the paint color for the entryway, and Donna says, "Greige," and the world resumes its rotation. But something has shifted, not in the house, but in me. The seam in my mother's vase is smooth, not invisible, and it will always catch the light if you position it just so. It is not perfect, it is honest. I think I am trying to be the same. In the afternoon, while they walk through and debate switches and knobs, I sit on the front steps and look out at the street. A boy rides past on a bicycle with streamers on the handlebars and a paper root bag swinging against his hip. A woman in a visor jogs by with a dog that looks like a rug with opinions. Down the block, someone grills, and the smell of hot dogs and onions floats over like a note from a radio you forgot you left on. My phone buzzes. A message from Mrs. Alvarez asking if I can help her nephew with his English homework later. I say yes because I want to, not because I think I ought to. The difference lands in me like a bird. I don't know if the bigger conflict will be clean. There will be baby showers and christenings and holidays with place cards. There will be times someone forgets to call and times I say no to jobs that sound like help but taste like being put in a closet. There will be moments when Ethan is pulled in the tide between his mother and his wife and his mother-in-law, and I will remember to send him a life jacket instead of an anchor. But I am here, on this step, on this street, in a town where the hydrangeas are so blue they look like they were drawn by a child, and in my kitchen, peonies are opening in a vase mended by my own hand. That has to count for something. I suspect it counts for almost everything. After the Sunday on the steps, the air in me felt different, like I'd cracked a window in a room I'd been breathing stale in for years and didn't notice. I slept with the fan on low and woke to the soft thud of the morning paper in the hall and the neighbor's kettle singing 2 doors down. In my kitchen, the peonies swelled day by day until they were all crumple in perfume, and I started cooking like a woman who wanted her house to smell like something was becoming. I made arroz con pollo the way Mrs. Alvarez taught me, and I brought her a plate. We ate at my little table, the vase between us, and when the train passed, making the spoons buzz, we paused our talk and then picked it up where we left off, like old friends do when a commuter line runs through what they know. The Parkers closed on the house the following week. Moving trucks muscled into the cul-de-sac, and men in matching shirts carried in a sectional I could never nap on for fear of wrinkling it. The group text pinged with photos of the new key on a leather fob, and the kitchen island spread with paint swatches like butterflies pinned, all with names like Oyster, Cloud, Bone, Whisper. Ethan sent me a shot of the backyard at dusk, the string lights they'd draped already glowing like good intentions. "Come by?" he wrote. I stared at the blue bubbles of my own reply, then typed, "Tomorrow after work." It was not a no. It was not a yes, you can count on me like breath. It was practice at pausing. The next time I went, the front entry smelled like fresh paint and lemon. Donna was barefoot, a glass of something green in her hand, and her eyes traveled to my sneakers like they might tell her a story she didn't want to read. "We're instituting a shoes-off policy," she announced, sing-song, and gesture-swept toward a woven basket by the stairs where pairs of loafers and sandals lay like soft punctuation. "So much easier on the floors," she added. I bent without comment and tucked my sneakers in next to a pair of suede moccasins in a shade with a name. Ethan came up behind me, hugged me in that quick way he does when he's both rushing and trying, and said, "Wait till you see the nursery," with a pride that almost erased the ricochet my ribs were feeling. We walked into a room that used to be a guest bedroom and was now covered in tiny gold stars. There was a white chair in the corner framed by a navy pillow that said Mimi's Spot in curly lettering, and I felt that now familiar cold slide between my shoulder blades. On the dresser, a print in a simple frame read, "Welcome to Mimi and Pop's little one," like a marquee. "Isn't it sweet?" Kayla said, and I said, "It is." I noticed the hamper tucked beside the dresser and the basket of creams and tiny socks rolled like sushi. I noticed what was not there. Anything with my name on it, my place. Ethan caught my eye, saw it maybe, and looked away toward the window. That was the first time I said no out loud. "Sunday, Mom, can you captain the IKEA run?" he asked, halfway down the hall. And in another life, I would have shored up my ankles, bought coffee for everyone, and learned the names of screws in Swedish. "I can't this Sunday," I said. "I promised Mrs. Patel I'd help her granddaughter with her college essay." The disappointment in his eyes was quick and small, like a match blown out. And I almost took it back because my reflexes are a symphony built on harmony. But I kept my mouth closed and nodded like the person who lives in my body is someone I respect. "Okay," he said slowly, and it ended up they bought the bookshelf assembled anyway. June warmed over us. The farmer's market started offering Jersey tomatoes, fat and seedy, that tasted like red. The church bulletin announced baptisms on the second Sunday of each month, with a little dove icon that always made me want to set out folding chairs and bake something. The hospital cafeteria switched to watermelon cubes in lieu of the winter fruit cocktail I will not miss when I die. And on a Tuesday, a text came in from Kayla. "Brunch shower. This Saturday. Donna's. Garden theme. Could you do the place cards? We'll send you the list. Go with a neutral script." I typed yes, because this was work my hands knew. And then she added, "Oh, it's adults only, kind of fancy, and the dress code is pastels. Can you stick to beige or blush? We have a palette." I stared at the train schedule on the refrigerator, at the photo of 8-year-old Ethan with a kite that refused to lift, and then at the word palette. I typed back, "I have a blush blouse," which I did, somewhere in the closet like a peony petal lost at the back. I sat at my table that night and did the place cards with my best steady, a confident line, each name framed by a tiny drawn sprig of lily of the valley because it felt like luck. I wrote Donna and Richard and Aunt Sandy and Kayla's friends, Aubrey, Claire, Tessa, and paused when I came to mine. "Margaret," the list read. I had expected Maggie, the name that feels like a sweater I've worn into the shape of my back. I wrote Margaret because I don't know yet how to argue over a line no one else can see. I wrote Mimi and Pop, and then, at the bottom, a name that wasn't there. I called Ethan. "Hey, kiddo," I said when he answered, and for a second I heard the video game bleep of his childhood in his new grown-up living room. "On the place cards list, do you want me to write Grandma for me?" He went quiet. That quiet that isn't silence, but choosing among feelings. "Mom," he said finally, "Kayla really wants to let the baby pick what to call everyone organically. We're kind of playing it by ear." "You can call me Margaret," I said, too polite for my own taste. "But a baby won't." "I know," he said softly. "It's just we're trying to make it smooth. Mom, I'll talk to her." "You don't have to make it smooth," I said, and then swallowed the words. "It's fine." I wore my blush blouse and a skirt that skimmed my knees and sandals I'd polished to a shine. The Parkers' garden was a page from a magazine, white tents strung with more lights, tables set with linen runners and peonies, and the kind of glasses that clink when you breathe. I handed Donna the place cards, and she fanned them like a winning hand of gin rummy. "Lovely," she said. "Such a clean line." She looked over the seating chart and rearranged 3 cards with 2 fingers, moving me near the beverage station and away from Kayla's seat. "You can help the caterer if you're over there," she said brightly. "She's short a pair of hands." I nodded, because you don't fight a battle you haven't chosen in someone else's backyard. They had a mimosa bar with cut fruit and a chalkboard that said, with little hearts, "Poor decisions." A white-haired woman in pearl studs poured drinks as I set out napkins and smiled at women in dresses the color of macarons. People whose lives didn't smell like train tracks said, "So excited for the nursery," and "We have the same pram, totally worth it," and "How are you feeling, Kayla?" Like the answer was already a shared memory. When we sat at last, the sun softened, and Donna stood to give a toast. She raised her glass, and her voice like a person who has never had to wait her turn for either, and spoke about lineage, about how families are a tapestry, and how she had always known her daughter would choose well. "To my daughter," she said, eyes shining, "and to the little one who will inherit a legacy of love and leadership." It was a kind speech, well cut and pressed, and there was room in it for us all, but none of us sat there, if you know what I mean. Kayla dabbed her eyes. Richard squeezed her shoulder. Ethan looked at me, quick, and then away. No one asked if I wanted to say anything, and it would have been a small thing in another life. But in a life built of small omissions, it became one more smooth stone added to a pocket already full. I carried plates. When the presents were opened, Donna handed me the ribbon bowl, the one with peel-off bows, like I was the person who'd know what to do with their slick curls. I made the traditional ribbon bouquet for the rehearsal that no one would need. My fingers doing what they'd done at other people's showers for years, and I watched Kayla's face glow as she held up monogrammed blankets and a white hand-knit sweater with a tag that said, simply, Ireland. When it was all done, someone said, "Group picture," and people arranged themselves in a way that was instinctive. Parkers in the middle, daughters and aunts flanking, Kayla in her pale dress like a candle. "All the moms," someone called out, and Kayla and Donna stepped forward and stood side by side. I hovered at the back until someone said, "Margaret, can you get one with my phone?" And there I was, again, looking at a screen that held a life I was both in and not in. I took the photo and handed it back. Later, when the image went up on Instagram with the caption, "3 generations of love," my hands went cold at the 2 women smiling at a future, and the third, the smallest generation, still a wish. They had counted without me. I read the comments, "Mimi, Pop, so blessed," and turned my phone face down on the table next to the vase in my apartment that still smelled like my mother's drawers. There were a dozen more nitpicks that month that I could inventory the way you tally change. A text thread named Parker Family that somehow didn't include me. An appointment with the OB that Donna went to and I heard about after. "It was last minute," Kayla chirped, the exclamation points doing too much work. The time I offered to sew a crib skirt, and Donna smiled and said she ordered one in a washable linen, you know how babies are. Like babies stained my kind of fabric worse. There was the day they sent out pastel invitations to the Sip and See the first Saturday after the baby's due date, and someone put my address wrong, so the envelope toured 3 post offices before landing limp at my door like a note that had nearly given up. By July, my peonies browned and fell, fat petals like the gowns of women who danced too long at a wedding. I clipped the stems to the crown and set the vase in the window empty, the light catching the seam I'd mended. The heat settled into the city, humming over the brick. I took to standing out on the fire escape at night with a glass of water, the sky that kind of murky purple you can feel on your eyelids. I thought about my mother in her screen door in the summer, a church fan in one hand, her laugh catching on the porch light. "Don't mistake showing up for disappearing," she'd said. The sentence sharpened, honed by repetition, until it could slice fruit clean in a moving bus. 15 days before the due date, Ethan called me on his way to work, traffic low enough that I could hear the turn signal like a metronome. "They moved the Sip and See," he said. "Baby could be early. We're doing a joint thing with the housewarming the last Saturday of the month. Big party, open house, all that." "The last Saturday is Mrs. Alvarez's granddaughter's quinceañera," I said, because my life is not a harmattan that blows around one family's calendar. "I can come by early, help set up." "That would be great," he said, relieved. "Mom, are you okay?" "This is a lot," I said. "It's okay to say that." "I know," he said, and I could feel the rout of his heart. Wife, baby, in-laws, work, his own, mine. I want you here. Then make a place, I said. Not cruel, not soft. His breath came out a little ragged, like a boy at the top of the slide. I will, he said, and we let the promise sit between us like a folded blanket, warm, but not yet around anyone's shoulders. The baby came on a day so hot the air outside clung to your shirt. An early morning text, water broke, heading to hospital, and then the hours elongated the way they do when you can do nothing but wait and clean your sink with a toothbrush. I sat by my own phone, the vase in the window, the train grinding my building on the hour. I thought about the day Ethan was born, the way I counted his fingers twice, and then counted the days until rent, the way joy and logistics share a bed when you're young and don't know any other way. It was around 4 when Ethan sent the photo. A tiny face in a knit cap, eyes clenched tight as pearls, mouth pursed like a question. A girl, 6 pounds, 11 ounces, healthy. Kayla glowing, Donna visible in the corner of the frame, hand on her daughter's knee, a pink sash on the bed rail that someone had already tied. The caption in the family text, "Welcome, baby Parker." Mimi and Pop couldn't be prouder. I pressed the phone to my chest as if that could coax the screen to update the words. Ethan wrote me separately, quick, and I could feel him crouching, sending me a secret under a table. Mom, she's perfect. We'll call when Kayla has slept. I want you to come tomorrow. There was a plan in place that smelled like protocol, only 2 visitors at a time, grandparents by rotation. Donna and Richard went first, and when I walked into the hospital room the next day, a nurse was fussing with the monitor and the air smelled like sanitizer and Triumph. Kayla was pale with joy. She said, "She looks like Ethan, right?" And I said, "She looks like herself." Donna handed me the baby with the practiced air of a person who had held many things of value, unafraid of dropping them. The weight was light and also everything. I tucked the newborn into the crook of my arm and felt my heart find in an instant a new room in itself, unplanned and already necessary. I sang under my breath the hymn my mother always hummed when she held a baby. Morning has broken, and the little bundle hiccuped like punctuation. We're still thinking on names, Kayla said, drowsy and drugged. And Donna said, I always loved Parker. And the nurse said, that would be cute. No one looked at me as if I would know that names are sometimes the only thing people like us keep control of, that they become the story we wear. When it was my turn to leave, Ethan walked me to the elevator. We named her Eliza, he said as the doors chimed open. Kayla's great-grandmother. We almost named her Margaret, he added, so quietly I might have pretended to not hear it. But Kayla felt like it was too solid. Eliza felt lighter. Light is good for summer babies, I said, sliding into the metal box. Congratulations, Daddy. The doors closed on his mouth, forming words he hadn't decided whether to say. The sip and see yanked itself onto the calendar like a tent pitched in a parking lot. Donna sent an evite that made my computer ping, and when I opened it, there was a graphic of a lemonade glass with mint and the address of the house I could have drawn with my eyes shut, and the line, hosted with love by Donna and Richard Parker. I bought a cotton dress the color of morning coffee with cream, and I ironed it in my kitchen, and I packed a bag with the only gift I felt right about bringing. The vase, mended, filled with peonies again. Early fall peonies from a florist who knows how to get what you shouldn't get in that season. Fat and expensive and exactly the thing my mother would have bought if someone had handed her the money and said, make it pretty. I wrapped the base in damp paper towels and foil, the way the ladies at St. Mary's taught me to keep flowers from fainting in transit. And I tucked the red bow in my bag, the one Donna said she'd save. I had asked for it back like it was nothing, and she had pressed it into my hands lightly, like I was borrowing through a mutual fund. My plan was simple and daring the way a woman's plans are when no one expects them to take up air. I would place the vase in the center of the dessert table. I would wait, and if no one asked me to speak, I would ask to say a few words. I would tell the story of the vase. I would say what I hadn't said. That lineage is not a monogram, that my mother's seam was visible and it still held. I would claim my name, not a dramatic exit, not a scene. A placing of a thing where it belonged. It would be public because this family had its biggest conversations on lawns with drones above and neighbors below. If I learned anything in the cafeteria at lunchtime, it's that the truth spoken while someone pours iced tea is easier to digest. I arrived early. The lawn was a poem again. White linen, glass pitchers beaded with condensation, little chalk signs labeled Arnold Palmer and lavender lemonade, in a script so consistent it made me suspect a computer. Donna stood in the kitchen, texting with her mouth set like punctuation she hadn't decided on. The baby slept in a bassinet near the window under a mobile of felted stars. "Oh, Margaret," Donna said when she saw the vase. "That's lovely. We do have a whole floral design, but maybe we can put this by the guest book?" She gestured toward a tiny table by the door where a pen lay at attention next to a sign that said, "Leave a note for baby Eliza," and a jar of paper hearts cut from craft stock. "I thought it would look well on the dessert table," I said, my voice polite and even. The seam caught the kitchen light, a line of honesty against the glass cake domes and white porcelain platters. Donna's gaze slid to the seam and then bounced off. "It doesn't quite go," she said, pressing her lips. "We're very minimal in here." "Me too," I said, and set it gently in the center of the dessert table anyway, where in an hour a vanilla cake with buttercream roses would sit. In another life, I might have apologized and tucked it near the door as if it were a dog tied outside a store. In this one, I fluffed the peonies with my fingers, my mother in my hands. Guests arrived. There were shoes in the basket, necklaces and cufflinks, babies and toddlers with bows as big as their faces. "She's a dream. She's an angel. She's got Kayla's nose." The cooing was a chorus, and the baby did what babies are hired by the world to do: sleep through adoration and wake only to drink. I held her, Eliza, soft and lemon-sliced with newness, while Ethan took pictures and Kayla arced from person to person like a host who has rehearsed. Donna worked the room the way a good engine does. You don't notice, but you get there quickly and with climate control. At some point, a realtor from down the block, Cheryl, as glowing as a high-gloss banister and somehow already a friend, arranged a candid-looking shot near the dessert table. "We'll need a cake picture for the newsletter," she trilled. The white cake was set, swags and roses, the words, "Welcome Eliza," in cursive so delicate I wanted to blow on it. People gathered, the way they do when sugar is imminent. It was now or never. I felt the press of all the days behind me, the ribbon invitations, the ribbons arranged, the seats found for others in rooms I have entered by the side door. I thought of the hospital, of Donna's hand, sure, on her daughter's knee. I thought of my own hand on Ethan's sneaker as I tied it tight for gym class in 4th grade because the laces were frayed, and that day I didn't have it in me to buy fresh ones. "Before we cut," I said, and the room did the thing rooms do when someone who never interrupts. Not a hush, a remarkless drawing back from words. I held myself steady the way I had with the glue, counting quietly, because sometimes math is prayer. "Can I say something?" I asked it of the air, and of Kayla, and of Donna, and of the baby who didn't know how to nod yet, but whose breath I could feel like a tide. Kayla smiled, practiced, flicking her eyes to Donna's like signals they had set long ago. "Of course," she said, and motioned toward the space by the cake as if I were stepping onto a small stage. I rested my fingertips on the vase. "This belonged to my mother," I began, my voice not shaking, thank God. "It sat on our table every time we had something to celebrate or someone to mourn. She told me it had been in our family longer than she had had her laugh. It's chipped. The seam shows where it was mended." I let my hand travel along the line like a map. A dog knocked it off my cabinet in a winter storm, and I meant to fix it, and I didn't. There were a lot of reasons why. None of them matter more than this. I fixed it now. People made those small, polite noises when they want to indicate they are good people. A neighbor said, "Oh," as understanding broke in late, like the sun under cloud. It wasn't enough. I kept going, gentle but steady. The way you talk to a baby around a corner, clear so they know the voice is for them. I have watched my son build a beautiful life in a house that holds him and his family. I am proud. I am more than proud. And I have also watched my place get smaller, sometimes by a choice I didn't make, sometimes by a choice I did. It's time I say this as kindly as I can. I have a place here. I'm Eliza's grandmother. I am not extra hands, a placeholder, or a neutral backdrop for someone else's photo. Something in the room shifted, like a summer thunderhead rearranging itself above a picnic. Donna's jaw flexed. A cousin adjusted his weight in his good shoes. Kayla's mouth made that little O that looks surprised even when she is not. Ethan stepped behind me, closer, his presence like a wall at my back, and I could feel him deciding who he is going to be. This vase is the kind of old that holds, I said. It isn't minimal. It doesn't match everything. But family isn't a palette. It's a memory full of edges you smooth down together. From today on, I'm going to show up in a way that makes me visible. If you need someone to take notes for a contractor, ask Richard. If you need someone to arrange napkins by color, ask a bridesmaid. If you want your daughter to have a story about the women who loved her, invite me to that table. But don't ask me to fold myself smaller so the picture looks neater. My name is Grandma Margaret. I'll answer to it. I smiled at the baby in Kayla's arms and said, soft, and if she calls me something else first, I'll learn it. But I won't accept "in the corner" as a name. I reached into my bag and lifted the red bow, the same one that had once been wound around a big Charleston green door, like a story you can see from space. I tied it around the vase, securing it under the porcelain roses, the modern ribbon on the old thing, bright as a stop sign in a forest. We're going to have seams, I said, and we can either hide them or let them catch the light. Then I stepped back. The room exhaled. It wasn't the applause kind of moment, it was the hover kind, the one just after a glass drops and before it hits the tile. Donna opened her mouth and then closed it. She set down her glass. It made a little click against the table that sounded like a decision. She walked toward me, and I braced without letting my shoulders show it. Margaret, she said, and she used my name in a way she had not before, like she meant the letters. You must be so proud of your son. It was, at first listen, the same sentence she had given me months ago in a different room, at a different table. But she kept going. And I am very grateful for his mother. Her voice wasn't round as the announcements she favors. It had edges, too, not sharp, but honest. She reached out and straightened the bow a millimeter to the left, in that way she has that can tidy a world. We can make room for multiple things, she said. She turned to the guests, to the newsletters and the neighbors and said, let's take a photo with all of Eliza's grandparents. Margaret in the middle, Ethan said, and I saw Kayla start, surprised, and then nod. We arranged ourselves around the cake and vase like people who know the difference between standing and posing. Cheryl, efficient with her heels and her camera app, tilted the phone. On 3, she said, family. And we didn't echo it, but the baby's face twitched like a smile. After, the cake tasted like a good bakery's promise, the icing sweet, the crumb fine. People came to me, one by one, with small sentences. An older man with a farmer's tan said, my granddaughter calls me G, like an offering. A neighbor's wife squeezed my hand and said, that was beautiful. Kayla touched my elbow as she moved past, then came back and stood with me for a second. I didn't know, she said, not whispering, not performing. About the vase, about... She made a gesture that took in air and backyard and names and light. She stopped and tried again. I'm learning. We all are, I said. The baby hiccuped in her arms. Kayla laughed at the timing, and the laugh didn't sound like glass. It sounded a little like mine used to. Ethan came to my side and slid a card into my hand, like a boy passing a note in class. I read your letter, he said quietly. It's in my wallet. I'm sorry, Mom. I got dazzled. His cheeks pinked like the blush of my blouse at that first shower. You always made everything look easy. It never was, I said, and tapped his pocket where the letter was. Keep that. When the decisions come fast and the lawn needs mowing and no one wants to take out the trash and you wonder who's supposed to say no for the first time in a day, read it. Richard joined us with small plates. He is a man who prefers the edge of conversations, and it takes a lot for him to step toward the middle. "Margaret," he said, and handed me a fork. "I'm sorry we didn't earlier." He moved his hand in the same way Kayla had. And I wondered at this family language, these little gestures that mean all of it. "I take notes well," he added, and I let myself laugh. We ate cake. We stood with our shoes in a basket and our feet on Donna's cooled oak floors. The train didn't run past this house, but I could feel it in my bones anyway, a rhythm I will never scrub from my hallway. When it was time to go, when the shadows had stretched long and the baby had been to 11 laps and back, I stood in the kitchen and looked at the vase with its red bow. "Leave it," Donna said, surprising me. "On the mantel, if you'll permit me." "It's yours if you'll have the seam," I said. "It's ours," she corrected, and that small pronoun adjustment felt like a bench at a bus stop you didn't know you needed until your knees thanked you. I walked home in the drifting light, the late summer air holding the last heat of the day. A kid on a stoop practiced chords on a guitar. A woman in scrubs laughed on her phone and swung her dinner bag. The convenience store on the corner set out a crate of peaches that smelled like a story. In my apartment, the window over my sink reframed a sky the color of a robin's egg. I set my keys in the old dish and put the little ribbon scrap left from trimming the bow on the shelf by the photo of my mother. I boiled water for tea, and while it steeped, I pulled out the church fan from my drawer, the one my mother used until it was soft at the edges. I fanned myself and thought about Eliza's breath against my neck, about the way she rolled her tongue like she was tasting the world, about the fact that someone would teach her what to call the ladies at church with the candy in their purses and the men at the barbecue who burned the first batch on purpose. The injustices had piled up in me like mail behind a door when you're away. Small mostly, junk and flyers, the occasional bill, and then the letter you'd been expecting all along. I had opened mine in a kitchen with a cake behind me and a bow in my hand, and I had said what I needed to say. Not to win, not to be right, to mark the seam, to stop erasing myself from photos I will one day wish I had framed. There will be another 1,000 decisions that will test my resolve to be visible and kind. There will be invitations where someone forgets to include my name on the envelope, and times when the best thing I do is say no, and stay home and make a pot of soup and light a candle for a woman who taught me to show up, but not disappear. But there will also be first words and first shoes, scraped knees and school plays, and a girl named Eliza, who I hope will stand on a step one day and say her truth in a voice that holds so steady it becomes a kind of song. When that day comes, perhaps she'll look at a mended vase somewhere in her house and think, without entirely knowing why, this is what we do. We hold and we shine at the seams, and when the bow falls loose, we tie it again, a little tighter where it counts, and a little looser where breath needs to flow. I washed my cup and set it in the drying rack. Across town, you could almost hear the lawns exhale, watered and tended. A text lit my phone, a photo of a mantelpiece, white and simple, with a vase on it caught by the final light of the day. The seam, in the picture, was bright as a thread. Underneath, Ethan had typed 2 words. "Looks right." I pressed my thumb to each letter, then to the screen. "It does," I wrote back, and set the phone face down on my table like a promise kept. Outside, a train called to another train. Inside, the quiet didn't feel like an empty room anymore. It felt like a beginning that was late and right on time. Inside, the quiet didn't feel like an empty room anymore. It felt like a beginning that was late and right on time. In the morning, the first light threaded itself through the blinds and painted thin ladders on my countertop. I brewed coffee in the chipped French press I found at a church rummage sale years ago, the one that makes the kitchen smell like 2 decades of mornings. I stood by the sink with my hands wrapped around the mug and listened. The neighbor's kettle singing down the hall, the soft thud of the newspaper landing on the mat. A train rumbling by at the top of the hour like a heartbeat you only notice when you put your hand on your chest. On the sill, my mother's peonies had given up their last perfume days ago, so the vase sat empty, seam catching the light like a line drawn on purpose. My phone pinged. For a second, my old body flinched with the reflex of a person waiting to be deployed. Instead of an assignment, there was a photo. The mantel at the Parker house, with the vase centered under a mirror's clean rectangle, a little sun on porcelain. "Looks right," Ethan had written last night. Underneath it, this morning, a new message from Kayla. "Breakfast soon? Just us. I owe you coffee." A separate ping. The family group text had been renamed Eliza's Village, and my number was in it. Small things, maybe, but I felt the air shift inside me like someone had opened a side door. That afternoon, I went to the hospital cafeteria and stood behind a counter with a hairnet over my head and a squeeze bottle of ketchup by my elbow. Nurses in lemon scrub tops and doctors with their badges turned backward ordered sandwiches and salads and spoke in that shorthand people use who work near sorrow. "How's the baby?" they asked, because I had been the woman who'd passed around a photo yesterday like a deck of cards. "Perfect," I said. "Her name is Eliza." I said it out loud again and felt the sound anchor in me like a post driven into ground. When my break came, I sat at the narrow table by the window and, without meaning to, I wrote a list on a napkin. Tuesday, Mrs. Patel's granddaughter's essay. Wednesday, chili for Mrs. Alvarez after her doctor's appointment. Thursday, call Father O'Leary about baptisms. I looked at the third line for a long time. The church bulletin with the little dove had been out on the table on Sunday when I stopped by to pick up canned goods for the pantry. Baptisms, second Sunday of the month. It always made me think of steam rising from a street after a rain, how the heat of the ground met the newness of water. Kayla chose a diner for breakfast, the kind with a counter and pancakes bigger than the plates. We sat in a booth near the window, the sun making our coffee look grand. She wore a ponytail and no eyeliner and the kind of tired you earn. "I didn't sleep last night," she said, picking at the paper ring around her napkin. "Is that normal?" "It is," I said. "The air changes for a mother and the moon gets bossier." She laughed, surprised, and the sound wasn't glassy. "I owe you more than coffee," she said, serious again, eyes dark and honest. I didn't see it. How you were being moved to the edge. I've always been the kind of person who loves a plan. I didn't realize my plan felt like a plan for you, too." She tucked hair behind her ear the way she does when she's choosing her words. "When you said what you said, I felt something unlock and something else sting. Both things were true." "That's how good keys work," I said, thinking of the iron key I had given her, the weight of it in my hand. "They open and they remind." I put my palms flat on the table, the diner formica cool and clean under my skin. "I want to be helpful. I like showing up. It's one of the ways I know how to love, but I won't disappear to do it." She nodded. "Then let's not let you." She took a breath. "Can we make an actual plan? Not a plan like a pallet. A plan like, on Tuesdays, you come hold the baby and I shower and cry if I need to, and you make me a sandwich and tell me I'm doing okay. And on Thursdays, you read to her and I answer emails and no one knocks on the door with a delivery we don't need. And I'll put you on the pediatrician's list, not as a backup, as a person. A person. Not a helper, not a shadow, not a chair near a sideboard. A person." "On Tuesdays and Thursdays," I agreed. And the waitress slid our plates in front of us, like she'd been waiting for us to finish the hard part before giving us syrup. We split pancakes and talked about things that matter in weeks with newborns, milk and burping, and how long a shower can actually be. 12 minutes, I said, because I have timed them, and Kayla wrote 12 min on a napkin and tucked it into her pocket like directions. Before we left, she reached across the crumbs and touched my wrist. "Grandma Margaret," she said, and the words fit in the air like they had been designed for it. At home, I propped the church bulletin on my salt shaker. It was an old habit of mine, letting decisions sit near the place I seasoned my food. I called Father O'Leary the next day and left a message, my voice calm. "I'm calling about a baptism date," I said. "My granddaughter, Eliza." I'm her grandma, Margaret Santos. Yes, Ethan Santos, the one who used to be an altar server until he discovered soccer. I heard the smile in my own voice and decided to let it live there. He called back before lunch, his voice full of that parish warmth that made the church feel like a good sweater. "Second Sunday in September," he said. "Tell me if there are any special requests." "There is one," I said. "I'd like to bring the flowers." The following Tuesday, I went to the house with a canvas tote stuffed with lunch and a paperback I'd read 4 times and a little zip bag of things no one tells you you'll need. Nursing pads, lanolin, breath mints, hearing for when quiet feels like heavy air. I took off my shoes and tucked them into the basket where summer sandals and one pair of teeny baby booties made me grin, and I washed my hands. Kayla met me in the hall with eyes like a deer in a backyard. "I can't get her to settle," she said, "and my hair feels like it has been on my head for 100 years, and Donna keeps texting to say she's found a better swaddle, and—" I put a hand up gently and took the baby from her arms, the way you take a bowl of water someone's trying not to spill. "Shower," I said. 12 minutes. I pulled a chair to the window in the nursery, whose wall was still dotted with gold stars, and I sat and sang the hymn my mother hummed, rocking my foot without thinking. The baby hiccuped, then sighed. Kayla called from the bathroom, water going full blast. "I think I cried? I don't know what my face is doing." "You cried," I called back. "It's a good sound." I made sandwiches with the chicken salad I brought and set a glass of water next to them, like a person who knows thirst. When Kayla came back, the lines in her forehead had softened into something that looked like her. She ate half a sandwich in 3 bites and then put it down and cried again because she felt safe enough to put it down and cry again. "You're doing okay," I said, and I meant it. She looked at me like people do when they hear the truth in their own language. On Thursdays, we read. I brought picture books from my shelf, the ones I'd kept because the art was a whole room and the words fit into your pocket. We read Goodnight Moon and The Snowy Day, and a book about a girl whose grandmother kept a garden on her windowsill because her building didn't have land. The nursery no longer had just Mimi's spot on a pillow. There was now a soft knit throw over the corner chair with a small stitched label I'd sewn one night while the train shook the windows and I felt steady anyway. The label read, "For rocking, for resting, for remembering. Grandma Margaret." No one took it off. Donna surprised me, and maybe herself. She showed up on a Friday during one of my days, holding a bag of groceries and looking lighter than I'd seen her since the house search madness. She set down the bag and pulled out hard pears and good cheese and a baguette in a sleeve of paper that crackled like a small fire. "I didn't know what to bring," she said. "I always bring cheese. It's a thing I do when I don't know what else to do." She looked around the nursery and took in the pillow and the throw and me in the chair with the baby. And she didn't flinch. She sat on the floor and took off her bracelets so they wouldn't scratch the baby when she took her later. "When my mother-in-law visited after Kayla was born," she said, talking to the empty air between us like a new friend, "she redecorated my kitchen while I took a nap. I woke up and my glasses were in a different drawer and I thought I might scream forever." She laughed a little, then shook her head. "I became a person who plans everything so I never feel like that again. I'm sorry I made you feel like that at my table." There it was. What an apology looks like when it's not wrapped in tissue paper and sugar. "We're better than our worst instincts," I said. "Every one of us." We ate cheese on the floor, and when Eliza woke up and made that small O with her mouth that meant she was thinking about being hungry, Donna said, "Your song the other day, was that Morning Has Broken?" And I laughed. "I only know 6 songs, and 3 of them are hymns," I said. "Teach me the others," she replied, and I did, right there, humming low, the baby's breath a metronome. September blinked and arrived. The day of the baptism was the kind of Sunday that sits in a frame. Blue sky, light wind, leaves thinking about turning. I carried the vase to St. Michael's with peonies that weren't in season and still made a scene. The florist in town had done magic, and I told her so. "For a baptism?" she asked, when I'd ordered them, and when I nodded, she said, "Then they'll behave." I set the vase on a small table near the font, and the seam glowed under the stained glass like a truth invited to stay. People filled the pews, cousins and neighbors and women from St. Mary's, who were happy to cross one town over to see if Father O'Leary still told long stories in his homilies. He did, and it was perfect. Kayla wore a simple dress and her hair back in a clip. Ethan held Eliza in a white gown that had been in a drawer at Donna's, a family thing I respected without needing to own. When it was time, we all stood at the font. The water was cool in its bowl, and the priest smiled down like he always had when he baptized babies who kicked exactly once. "Who stands with this child?" he asked, the words older than our lives, and I said clearly, "We do." The collective breath in the church lifted us a little. He poured water over Eliza's hair and said her name, the whole one, all at once, Eliza Santos Parker, and I felt my mother's hand at my elbow, steady and proud. After, we gathered in the church hall, where the light bounced off the floor and the tables were the same wooden kind I'd set up and taken down 100 times. On the buffet, there was arroz con pollo and meatballs and a platter of cut fruit that included pineapple because the Parkers cannot not include pineapple, and deviled eggs Mrs. Alvarez snuck in even though we'd said she could just come and sit. Donna brought a quiche that made everyone nod and ask for the recipe. I made my mother's sweet potatoes because someone has to keep sweetness rooted. On the stage in the corner, the kids ran laps the way kids do when their legs are new. Someone asked for words, and I stood without waiting to see if I was being asked to or if I was supposed to take the picture. "Family," I said, looking at the vase across the room and the seam that didn't try to hide. "It's like a song everyone already knows, but we each sing our part. Some of us are loud, some of us carry the harmony. Today, we start teaching Eliza her part." I didn't cry until after, when I wiped down the counter near the coffee urn and felt my mother laugh in my chest. Life settled into its kind of rhythm that isn't steady as a metronome, but is reliable as a train. On Tuesdays and Thursdays, I came to the house and sat in the chair with the throw bearing my name. On Sundays, if they came to church, we sat in the fourth pew left side where the stained glass throws little blue squares on your hands in the right months. The group text stayed named Eliza's Village, and it turned out to be true. When anyone needed something, they asked the village, and no one assumed I was the clerk. Sometimes I said no to things, and the world didn't spin differently. Once, when Kayla had a last-minute appointment she wanted but didn't need me for, Richard took the afternoon and sent me a photo of Eliza asleep on his chest with the caption, "Learning the Art of Stillness." Pop. I saved it. There was a night, 2 weeks before Thanksgiving, when the phone rang ungodly late and I answered anyway because the ring sounded like Kayla. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I know it's late. She won't stop crying, and I can't. My chest feels tight." She made the small noise of someone swallowing a fear. I told her to sit on the floor with her back against the bed and to breathe while counting the number of light bulbs in the room, because sometimes naming things pulls you back to the ground. Then I slipped on my sneakers, put a sweater over my pajamas, and walked to the corner where the night bus stops. The driver nodded at me like we were the only two people who believed in the holiness of showing up under streetlights. When I got there, I used the key Ethan had given me for Tuesdays and Thursdays and emergencies. Inside, the house was quiet, except for the stairs that always creak third from the top. Kayla sat on the nursery floor, eyes smudged, shoulders shaking. I folded myself down next to her and held the baby against my chest and patted her through the hiccup of the cry. "It's okay," I said to both of them. "It's okay." Kayla leaned her head on my shoulder like a girl in a gym class and let herself be someone's child again for a minute. "I'm so embarrassed," she said into my sweater. "Don't be," I said. "Babies cry, mothers cry, families cry, trains cry when they pull into stations in winter. The world didn't end." She laughed at that through tears, which is the sound I wish I could bottle and put on a shelf. By the time Thanksgiving came, the house smelled like butter and sage and a baby's shampoo. This year, the seat assignments had my name in my own hand because Donna asked me to write them. "Your line is better than mine," she admitted, handing me the pen like a baton in a race we were suddenly running on the same team. My card said, "Grandma Margaret," and it sat next to Mimi, without commentary. In the center of the table, the vase held branches of bright berries and a few late roses that looked like peonies had disguised themselves for fall. The seam gleamed like a vein of ore running through stone. Before we ate, Donna cleared her throat. "Margaret," she said, "would you say grace?" I did, and I thanked God for food and for trains and for the babies who make us learn our own voices again. December brought more lights than the cul-de-sac had likely ever seen, and my apartment glowed with one strand wrapped around the window like a little electric scarf. On a Sunday afternoon, Kayla and Ethan came over with Eliza, and the three of us squeezed into my kitchen and ate crumb cake from the bakery with the sugar so thick it looks like snow in the box. I pulled out the Christmas ornaments my mother left me, careful as teeth, and held each one up to Eliza's eyes. She grabbed an angel and cooed at her painted face, and then she reached for the old glass ornament with the faded glitter M my sister made when we were kids. She said, serious, and I looked at Kayla, and Kayla looked at me, and our eyes stung the way happy eyes do. "That's right," I whispered. "That's me." She said Gamma first in January, pointing at a photo of me and Ethan on the boardwalk in sweaters and wind. Gamma, slow like a spell. It got simpler and stickier and more utterly true until it was Grandma, one afternoon in March when snow fell in the kind of fat flakes that mean hot cocoa later. She said it like she was recognizing a thing she already knew, not like she was learning a new word. I pretended to keep stirring the pot so I wouldn't cry into it and make the cocoa salty. By spring, the vase had become a kind of marker. We began to fill it with things other than flowers when flowers were not what we needed. In Lent, little slips of paper with the names of people we were praying for. On Mother's Day, the one after the bow and the broken gift, we stood in the kitchen in our socks and put notes in it that said, "Thank you," in different hands. "Thank you for rocking me at 3 a.m. E, thank you for telling the truth. K, thank you for the letter. Ethan." In summer, tiny seashells from a day trip to Sandy Hook where the gulls laughed at our picnic and Eliza ate her first strawberry under a sun hat the size of her head. When the light hit the seam, we all noticed, because noticing is a habit once you start. There were still slips because families are not fixed. They breathe. A time Donna chose table linens without asking me when she'd promised we'd choose together, and I felt the old shadow behind my knee. A day I almost said yes to baking 6 pies for a fundraiser because it felt like the kind of thing a good person does, and then I said I could bake 2 pies and bring paper plates, and no one thought less of me. Once, in a rush, Kayla texted, "Can you watch Eliza at 3?" And I stared at the clock in the hospital and at the nurses' faces, held up my gloved hand while refilling the salad bar, and typed, "I can be there at 4. It was a small no. It was the right one. When I got there, Kayla kissed me on the cheek and said, "Thank you for coming." And she meant for coming now, for coming still. On a June afternoon, I sat with Eliza on the stoop of their house, both of us with ice pops melting faster than dignity. She tapped the vase through the front window's glass with her finger when she saw it on the mantel and said, "Pretty." I told her the story of my mother's porch, the way the screen door squeaked like a violin tuning up, and the way the fan in church would flash its little tongue of wood between women's fingers in July. "Your great-grandmother," I said, "put peonies in that vase every Memorial Day and said they smelled like heaven sneaking in for a visit." "Heaven," Eliza tried out, and I thought about how a word can live in a body before a body knows what the word means. I thought about how many words I had carried in mine without letting them out, and how good it felt to hear my own voice in rooms it had once only polished. A delivery truck rolled by, the driver waving because we were beginning to be the kind of people who waved to drivers. A neighbor walked his dog and stopped to coo at Eliza, and she hid her face in my collarbone and then peeked out and yelled, "Hi!" with the drama children save for dogs and mailmen. The world felt busy and soft. In August, when the air hung close and cicadas sang like broken sprinklers, we hosted a little party in my building's courtyard. Folding chairs, paper lanterns, a punch bowl that made everyone under 30 nostalgic for something they never experienced. Mrs. Alvarez made tamales, and I made my mother's lemonade with a slice of lemon on the rim because she was that kind of woman, and Donna brought a salad that had so many herbs it tasted like a garden party. Richard arrived with a cool box full of ice and set it down like he was setting a cornerstone. Neighbors came with foil pans and Tupperware and their own seams. Ethan strung lights across the courtyard like he was staking a claim. The vase sat in the center of a borrowed card table filled with hydrangeas blue as storybook skies. A train went by, and not one of us paused. We simply set our forks down for a second and then picked up where we left off. It felt like a church with no pews, a family with no seating chart. We took a photo that night under the lights. Not the kind that needs a drone. Not the kind that requires someone to pull you forward by the elbow or ask you to move to the side. A neighbor's teenager, good with phones and angles, counted down. 1, 2, 3, breathe, she said instead of cheese, and we did. When the picture came up on the feed later with the caption, Neighborhood Night, I looked at our faces and saw rest and joy and a baby who would later say she remembered the lanterns, even if she only remembered them because we told her. If you have read this far into my life in your own mind, you might be waiting for a neat ending. I have learned the best endings aren't the kind with ribbons. They're the kind with bows that you tie and retie because strength comes from the tug. The vase will chip again one day, and we will mend it. Someone will forget to call me, and I will call instead. I will continue to put my name on the sign-up sheet for casseroles, and I will continue to say no when I feel my edges start to blur. The house with the shoes-off basket will one day have sneakers piled by the door and a teenager who slams it. And when that day comes, maybe I will be the one who says, "Walk it back, sweetheart," in the voice I learned from my mother. If the bow falls loose, one of us will tie it, a little tighter where safety lives, a little looser where breath needs to flow. The day Eliza turned one, we had a cake that looked like it came from a fairy story. Strawberries and whipped cream, because buttercream and toddlers are a sticky marriage. We set the vase on the picnic table with dahlias that looked like fireworks. Make a wish, Kayla said, blowing out the candle with Eliza's fist around hers, and I made mine silently, that this girl would grow up in a house where seams are not secrets, and that she will always know which chair is hers. Later, after the dishes were stacked and the ants had found their way to crumbs and back, I stood at the sink next to Donna, hands in suds, our hips touching lightly because the kitchen wasn't wide. I think about that day, she said, with the bow and the cake. How badly I wanted everything to be neat. She scooped a handful of bubbles and watched them slip like lace. And how much better this is, she finished, and then she laughed, the sound not entirely unlike my mother's on a porch in August. I won't pretend I don't sometimes look at the Charleston green door on their house and imagine a bow big enough to seatbelt the whole world into kindness. I won't pretend the train doesn't sometimes rattle my windows at 2 a.m. and remind me of every night I stayed up to make rent. I won't pretend anything, really. That seems to be the gift of this age, the permission to tell the truth gently and to let it sit in a room until it becomes part of the furniture. When I look at Eliza now, toddling with the determination of a governor and the joy of a person who has not yet been asked to be quiet in a room where her laugh takes up too much ceiling, I see a line from my mother to me to her that isn't straight and doesn't need to be. Some nights I stand at my window with my cup of chamomile, my indulgence, breathing in a summer that smells faintly of fried onions and cut grass, even in a city. And I picture the vase on their mantel under the mirror that looks like a little lake. I think about the seam casting a thin, bright line across that room and across our days. I think about how every family has a story we decide to tell or to swallow, and how this time I gave mine a chair and let it eat. I watch the train lights slide along the faces of the buildings like a steady hand and feel the kind of peace that comes from building a life with both love and boundaries. If you've ever stood on a curb with a smile that made your jaw tremble, if you've ever held a broken thing and felt your heart remembered how to mend it, if you've ever learned to say yes to yourself so you could say a better yes to the people you love, write me a little note in the comments and tell me the seam you've learned to make shine. Tap that like button if you want more stories where the quiet becomes a beginning, and subscribe so you and I can keep walking each other home, one honest step at a time. Because in the end, We are all vases, beautiful, fragile, mended. And life is just the light we let our seams catch.